Thar's Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the XRAY GTXE 23 edition Bag 8, the center solid shaft and motor. So let's get started. So for this step, we're gonna need the motor. So make sure you have that. Be careful opening up the bag of small parts. There's a lot of set screws and shims in there, so you don't want to lose anything. All right, so for the first step, we're going to need this piece here. We're going to need this shaft here. And we're going to need a M4x4 set screw. And along with that, we're going to need some Loctite. Okay. So the set screw is going to install in this hole. And the way this is going to be oriented is there's a flat on the shaft here. So make sure that flat is facing the hole. So that way when you install the set screw pushes down on the flat, and that'll help prevent it rotating. So I just started the set screw, and then I'm going to go ahead and install the shaft just like so, and then I'll go back and tighten down on the set screw. Just take a microfiber towel, make sure if there's any excess thread locker, you can clean that up. So now we can install the center gear and the out drives. So we're gonna need both out drives, the center gear. We're gonna need the two M5x4 set screws. We're gonna need the steel bearings, steel shielded bearings, along with 3 M3x6 flathead screws. All right, so I think there's a better way to install this center gear, and what I'm hoping to achieve is being able to install this further forward. So in order to do that, I'm going to take these. I've noticed that there's these 3 holes in this aluminum piece that aren't really being used for anything. So what I'm hoping to do is see if we can install the bosses that we originally threaded into those unused holes, effectively making the gear sit closer to the aluminum piece. So let's try that out. So I'm making sure I'm using the flat side here to install, and see if I can get those bosses to install in the unused holes. let's try to install these screws. And then slowly work your way around to get this seated. And it looks like this is going to work. Okay. So as you can see, I've got those bosses that were originally supposed to be threaded into according to the manual. I'm not using those. Those are actually being inserted into the straight through holes in this aluminum piece. And now you can see that the gear itself sits underneath the aluminum piece. Effectively, this is going to move the gear closer to the front, so we'll have more clearance in the cutout in the chassis. So we can go ahead and reassemble this. So put the bearing on. Make sure you line up the hole with the flat. Put a thread locker on the flat. Thread locker onto the set screaming. And then on the other side, we're going to go ahead and install the bearing. And lastly, we're going to install the out drive with a little bit of thread locker onto the set screw. Now we can continue. So we have the motor mount, this plastic insert, and the plastic pieces for the other side of the motor mount. So we can put these two pieces together. You have a flat side and you have a side that has some upsets. So the flat side is going to be flat and these are going to go like so. We're going to take this plastic insert. We're going to go ahead and insert it into the motor mount. There's only one way it can go, and you want to make sure the lip is facing the inside. And then this basically installs like so, with the short side going into the motor mount and the long side going into this side. Now we can go ahead and install the carbon fiber brace. And we're going to install it using 4 3x8 flathead screws, which are going to go here. And take note of the orientation, because one side is flat and the other side has the countersunk holes for the screws. And then the 2 M3x30 screws are going to go in these two holes here. So you want to first install the flathead screws, because the button head screws actually overlap a little bit. And you want to make sure you install everything loosely. You want to have some play in there, and we'll go back and then tighten everything down once it's installed on the chassis. And the 2 screws that go in the front go into aluminum, so I'm going to go ahead and add some Loctite. So with this together, we can install the rear chassis brace and then install this onto the chassis. We're gonna go ahead and install our M4 lock nut in the chassis brace here. Pushes right in, lines up perfectly. Now what we can do is grab our chassis and install this. Try to make sure y'all can see this. So we're gonna need an M3 by 12 button head screw, and then we're gonna need a M4 by 12 flathead screw. So we're going to basically pre-assemble with both screws in first, and then we're gonna tighten down this screw, and then we're gonna tighten down the screw that attaches back here. So I'm gonna go ahead and install some thread locker onto this M3 by 12 screw that's gonna go in the back. And then it's gonna install in this brace that's installed on the transmission back here. Okay, now we can install the M4 by 12 flathead screw on the bottom, which is gonna install in this hole right here. And no Loctite is needed on there since it's going into the lock nut. So with these two screws installed, we can go ahead and tighten down. We're gonna tighten this one down first. Make sure it's nice and snug, and then we can go back and tighten the one on the top. With the chassis brace installed, we can now install the motor mount assembly along with the drive shafts. So the short drive shaft is going to be on the front, and the long drive shaft is going to go in the rear. And we're going to install using 4 M4 by 12 flathead screws in these holes. So we can line up the holes, and we're going to install the screws in these holes. Okay, and the two screws that are going to install in the front are going into aluminum, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of Loctite on there. Okay. Flip this back over, and now we can go ahead and tighten up these screws on this carbon fiber brace. And as you can see, everything is moving nice and smooth, and we want to make sure once we tighten everything down here, it still does. That's done. Everything moves nice and smooth. We can set this aside for now as we prepare the motor onto the sliding motor mount. All right, so I found a problem with the motor that I selected, the Hobbywing Xerun 4274. The 2250 kV motor is too long to fit onto the chassis. So you can see here, if I try to install it, the motor actually hits the steering bell crank posts here. And the reason that is that out of all the Hobbywing motors, this is the longest one. So most Hobbywing motors are 68 millimeters. So the 4274, what it means is 42 millimeters in diameter and 74 millimeters long. So the 2250 kV motor is the only one that is 74 millimeters long. Every other kV motor is a 4268. So that 68 millimeters will fit here. So if you look at the X-Ray website, the motors that are pictured on the car itself is a 4268 or the 68 millimeter motor. So I'm gonna have to get another motor, but just let y'all know and make y'all aware of that so you don't make the same mistake I do. So I took another motor out of a project of mine. It's the Hobbywing Xerun 4268 G3 motor, the 1900 kV, and this is a 4268, which means it's 68 millimeters long and 42 millimeters in diameter. So this will work right here. See, we've got space for it. So we're gonna go ahead and install this onto the chassis. I don't have a pinion yet, so we're just gonna go ahead and install the motor onto the motor mount and then install the motor mount on. So, all right. So I'm going to use 2 M4x12 screws rather than using the M3 screws because they have a better clamping force. I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on that. So don't want this to back out. And take note of the orientation. This is going to be facing the outside of the vehicle. You've got 2 holes that's going to be facing on top, so you can stick your screws in from the top and adjust it. So I'm going to use these 2 holes here. So kind of look at the orientation. I'm going to use these 2 holes here to install. It is a 3 millimeter Allen, so you can go ahead and tighten down. Okay. So that's ready to install onto the chassis. So next, we're going to need 2 M3x14 screws and 2 3.2 shims or washers. And since this is going into aluminum, I'm going to put some Loctite on here. So take note when you install this onto the motor mount, the motor is actually going to hit a little bit right here, but you might just have to wiggle it a little bit and it'll go ahead and install, just like so. So now we can install the washer onto the screw and then line it up with the holes in the mount. And then you can take your 2.5 millimeter Allen and tighten down. And if you had your pinion, you could set your gear mesh, but since I don't, I'm just gonna leave this kind of loosely installed. I'm not gonna tighten down all the way, just kind of shoulder it up and make sure it doesn't move. So that's it. Actually, this isn't going to work because this orientation is not going to work. If you can see, it's going to be hard to see, but the sensor plug is right here, and it interferes with the post for the steering. So we're going to clock this the other way and hopefully get some clearance for that. So take note of the orientation that I have. See how this will work. So you have access to the sensor wire plug. I think this is a good position. I could use the two M3 holes that are in the motor, but I think that'll still bring it a little bit too close. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick with this. I don't have my pinion, I'm not going to tighten down all the way. I'm just kind of snug, and there we go. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Please let me know down in the comments if you had any issues or if you have any tips or tricks for anyone else. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one where I install bag 10, the electronics. There's no bag 9, so we're gonna skip right to bag 10. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.